Good afternoon. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on September 12, 2024. And today I'm very pleased to be joined for the first time on Reason to Resist by Elijah Magnier. Elijah is a veteran war correspondent and political analyst with over 35 years of experience covering decades of war in the Middle East and North Africa. He specializes in real-time reporting on politics, strategic and military planning, terrorism and counterterrorism. He has strong relationships with key players in the region and has acquired in-depth experience and solid knowledge of the complex political situations in Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, Sudan, Afghanistan, and Syria. Thank you so much for joining me today, Elijah.
Thank you for having me.
And I understand you're coming to us today from Brussels, the heart and soul of the European Union, or what remains of it nowadays. I'd like to begin by talking to you, Elijah, about some claims by the Biden administration that Iran has supplied short-range ballistic missiles to Russia. And just by way of background, and I'm sure you'll be familiar with all these facts, but for the benefit of our audience, I'd like to highlight that Israel assassinated Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran on July 31st. Iran's government immediately vowed severe retaliation. Within days of Haniyeh's assassination, interestingly, former Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu traveled to Iran and met with its leaders. At the same time, reports circulated that Russian military transport planes were ferrying military equipment from Russia to Iran, and that equipment reportedly consisted of Russian air defense systems and electronic warfare systems. Now, in response to claims that Iran has supplied ballistic missiles or other weapons to Russia, Iran's government recently issued the following statement, and I'm quoting: Iran considers the provision of military assistance to the parties engaged in the conflict, which leads to increased human casualties, destruction of infrastructure, and a distancing from ceasefire negotiations to be inhumane. Thus, not only does Iran abstain from engaging in such actions itself, but it also calls upon other countries to cease the supply of weapons to the sides involved in the conflict. Closed quote. So, Elijah, what do you make of all of this? In your view, and based upon the information available to you, do you believe Iran has supplied short-range ballistic missiles to Russia? And if so, do you believe that this is tied to Russia's supply of air defense systems to Iran?
First of all, it's important to change positions here. So anyone who is not part of the Western club is always under accusation, while the West can do whatever it wants and supply any country they want, even if this country or this entity is committing crimes against humanity, war crimes, or intent genocide. So it is permitted for the Americans to supply tens of thousands of tons of explosive to Israel when Israel is bombing the civilians in Gaza, when Joe Biden came out and said there are too many civilians killed. And then we see Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, complaining about the killing of UNRWA personnel, destruction of schools, and all that with US bombs. All the massacres that the Israelis are committing are US bombs, and with some components from Germany, France, and the UK. So that is permitted. It is permitted for Saudi Arabia to bomb the hell out of Yemen for 7 years, and any country that wants to bomb another, as long as part of the Western club, that is okay. Whenever another country, in this case we're talking about Iran, has a strategic relationship with Russia, because of the BRICS, because of the Shanghai Cooperation, because of the cooperation between all the global South, and because of the US abusive sanctions on these countries, when they get together to defend themselves, then it is a problem. So what you have mentioned is related to the war in Ukraine. Let us not forget something very essential, that not only the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin repeated, but also Kamala Harris and Joe Biden said numerous times that there are 50 countries. Even Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, said it 24 hours ago, that there are 50 countries in Ramstein, Germany, gathering to plan to conduct the war against Russia. So it is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. It's a war between NATO, led by the US, against Russia. Now, Iran cannot help Russia when Russia doesn't need help. It needs to help Russia in case of needs, when Russia is in need to be supported, and Russia played an important role in from before the beginning of the war to stop this war. Even in April 2022, there was a deal on the table, and the UK Prime Minister then, Boris Johnson, blew it up. So it is a war against Russia for what we know from Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, from what the Americans told us in Brussels, in the European community, that Russia will fall and we are going to loot Russia. We're going to divide all the natural resources. That is unfair for one country only to have so many under one command. That is the aim, to hit Russia. If Iran is supporting Russia in this war against the West to prevent the West from crippling the Russian economy, from creating an exodus of refugees, from creating a failed state, or from creating and supporting the Takfiri and the groups like Al-Qaeda that the West now is using in Russia and using it in Ukraine, and have used it before in Afghanistan and in other parts of the world, then it is not bad for Iran to support either Yemen or Russia or any country that is in need of help to stand on its feet and prevent a failed state.
Personally, Elijah, I have absolutely no issue with anything you've said. I completely agree. But the statement from the Iranian government, so let's just talk about what it's actually happening. What you've, I think, focused upon what is sensible, fair, and equitable, particularly given the conduct of the West over many decades. I'd like to just sort of focus for a moment on what is actually happening, because the statement by the government of Iran would suggest that it is not, in fact, supplying weaponry to Russia, whereas I would have thought that it is in the strategic interests of Iran to trade freely with Russia in terms of military equipment for which each side may have need in order to defend itself from time to time. Do you think, based on the information available to you, that in reality this trade is happening, and that there have been, for example, air defense systems, electronic warfare systems coming to Iran, and that Iran has supplied perhaps drones, perhaps short-range ballistic missiles, that this is in fact happening? And if so, do you think that that is principally the concern of the American government, that in fact the ability of Iran to defend itself is being strengthened?
This is a very important question, but allow me to expand a little bit, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when the Israelis assassinated a VIP guest, that is Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh, that was conducting the negotiation of a peace deal with the Americans and the Israelis indirectly in Doha and Cairo, the Iranian Wali Faqih, the leader of the revolution, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, declared that Iran will retaliate and ordered his forces to prepare for the attack and the defense, which means that Iran doesn't have enough defense system to stand against a joint attack from Israel and NATO, because we have seen how the US gathered all its friends around Iran in the Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, everywhere, to not only intercept the Iranian missiles and drones if and when Iran will retaliate rightly against Israel, but if Israel wants to retaliate to the retaliation, then Iran needs to be in a position of defense. And according to my knowledge, the Russians came to Iran to support it, to defend itself, not to attack the US and NATO and Israel, because the Russians never closed the doors on the US, and they enjoy good relationship with the Israelis, despite what Israel is doing and its violation of international laws and the crime against humanity and war crime that Israel is responsible of. This is why the Russians are supporting Iran in defending itself against the missile that can come from the Western coalition. Now, inevitably, for Iran to say we're not doing it, because first, there's a new president in Iran. Second, the objective of the new president is to try and ease the sanctions that the Americans have imposed on Iraq. We're talking about on Iran. We're talking about more than 4,500 sanctions, and they are increasing every month. Always the Americans find something to add to this maximum pressure that was started at the time of Barack Obama, at the time of Jimmy Carter in 1980, and then has increased. Even when Barack Obama signed the deal, he kept many sanctions in place and prevented banks from dealing with the central bank of Iran. So Donald Trump came with maximum pressure, and Joe Biden promised to return to the JCPOA nuclear deal, but instead he increased more sanctions. For Iran to come out and challenge the West, that is gathered to all against Russia with Ukraine, and we're talking here about Europe, that Iran believes there is a way to deal with the Europeans separately from the American, which in my opinion is wrong, because we in Europe are under the skirt of the US and there's no way out in any near future. So Iran believes that there is a way to deal with the West, and there is a way to de-escalate. And this is why the new president, Pezeshkian, was elected with the hope to improve the economy of Iran. To come out and say, we are delivering drones and we delivering missiles to Russia, that will fire back on the Iranian policy and on the Iranian economy if the Americans tighten the sanctions even more, because now the Americans cannot prevent Iran from selling its oil, because then there would be a general world crisis and the price of oil will reach $200 a barrel, in particular when there are heavy sanctions on Russia. And the sanction of Russia on Russia includes the energy. Even if we still in Europe buy 7% of our gas from Russia, we have decreased significantly our dependence on Russia, not only in energy, but in many other fields. This is why Iran officially cannot come out and say we are supporting Russia in providing drones and short or medium range missiles. Now, Iran has the capability of manufacturing, producing, and selling missiles, because since many decades, Iran has concentrated on defending itself on the missile system. And it proved right, because we see Russia today with thousands of nuclear bombs. It's not capable of using any of these bombs in its war against NATO. That is conducting a kind of a soft war, which is a classical war against Russia to prevent it from using nuclear capability. And this is why, if you look at Israel, in 11 months, Israel produces weapons, but you see the Americans and the Germans, including the French and the Canadian and the British, are constantly supplying Israel with ammunition, and Israel is fighting a non-state actor, while Russia is fighting 50 countries together, gathering in planning, but all of Europe, Canada, Australia, the United States are producing weapons to supply Ukraine. So even if Russia is manufacturing weapons and ammunition, it is never enough and never sufficient to stand against the coalition of the West and the production of so many countries together, even if Russia has the raw material that it needs for manufacturing weapons. And that war was very useful for Russia as an army to keep up with the modern warfare when it needs drones and it needs short to long range missiles. It needs tactical weapons. It doesn't need nuclear weapons for this war. Nuclear is only for deterrence. And this is why, personally, I don't see Iran not supporting Russia, in particular when Russia is supporting Iran, is supporting Syria, and is standing at the UN as a wall in front of any additional US sanctions on the United Nations.
Now, you averted to the question of the retaliation by Iran, Elijah, and it has now been approximately almost 7 weeks, I believe. So it'd be July 31st since the killing of Ismail Haniyeh. Hezbollah retaliated to the killing of Fuad Shukr, which occurred on the same day as the assassination of Haniyeh. It retaliated on August 25th, almost 3 weeks ago. I personally was of the view, primarily because the Iranian government said it would retaliate, and I think it generally doesn't make these threats unless it intends to carry them out, that it intended to do so, and that it would do so in reasonably short order. It still hasn't, however. And what do you make of all of this? Do you think that the retaliation will come, that it will come in the reasonably near future, or do you think there's some prospect that perhaps for reasons related to behind-the-scenes negotiations or a change in the internal thinking of Iran's government, that in fact that retaliation may not come? What's your expectation in that regard?
Well, there are many points here to highlight. First of all, Hezbollah is a non-state actor. Therefore, all its positioned offices, warehouses, most of these are secret. Some of these are known to the Israelis, and the Israelis are bombing these or refraining from bombing it, not to escalate the ongoing war in the south of Lebanon or along the borders in south of Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, and sometimes objectives in Syria. So to keep the pace and the rule of engagement under control. A non-state actor doesn't have ministries, doesn't have infrastructure to be destroyed. Therefore, it can afford to have a guerrilla warfare against Israel, in particular when Hezbollah is an organized, irregular non-state actor. Iran is a country where all its resources are known. This is not a secret, where all these bases are known. The ministries are very well identified, etc. It has a country to run. It has an infrastructure to look after, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have a dignity not to reply. But if we look today at the withdrawal of the Eisenhower fleet from the Mediterranean and from the Middle East, it's an indication of de-escalation that the Americans believe in, even if they still have enough power to be engaged in any war in case Iran wants to retaliate against Israel and Israel wants to retaliate to the retaliation. But in Iranian mentality, first time is not a problem. It is well known that the Iranians live in a word that is called in Arabic barzakh, which is the world between two worlds. When someone dies, they believe it goes in between two worlds where time has no meaning. So for the Iranians, time has no meaning. So they're not in a hurry. Secondly, is why fall into the game of Benjamin Netanyahu, who wants desperately to keep a war ongoing on any front, particularly when you have guaranteed defense ministers saying, we finished the job in Gaza, even if they did not meet their objectives, but where is the second war that will keep Netanyahu ongoing? In the West Bank is almost over. They've pulled out from Jenin, and now they still engaged relatively in Tulkarm. So the West Bank is really not a big theater of a war theater like in Gaza or even with Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is why Netanyahu needs another war to continue justifying his presence in the government. Iran is not going to offer that, and is certainly not going to embarrass Joe Biden's administration or the Democrats, so they do not follow Benjamin Netanyahu's steps, and they don't go to war in support of Israel, and then they give the upper hand to a Republican like Donald Trump, who was complaining about the small size of Israel and wants a bigger borders for the Israelis, inevitably from its neighboring countries, and to start with the West Bank, at least, and Gaza. Therefore, this is again counterproductive for Iran and for the Middle East, to bring the whole Middle East into another level of war, where the only beneficial is Benjamin Netanyahu and eventually Donald Trump. Now, that is one point. The second point, since Iran's constitution, Article 152, 153, imposes on Iran to support the oppressed people around the world, Iran has been fighting and hitting Israel since 1982, when it has supported Hezbollah and the Lebanese at that time, they were not Hezbollah, to uprise against the Israeli occupation. And since then, every single bullet fired by Hezbollah, or by the Syrians, or by the Palestinians, or by the Iraqis, or by the Yemeni, is a hit from Iran against Israel. So the account is so huge between the Iranian and the Israelis that Iran doesn't really need to keep up with the accounts. Therefore, the answer will come when Iran will be ready, and when Iran will retaliate against Israel, and Israel only, in one form or another, in a way that the world will see it, because it has to see it. It's something that is inevitable. But there is no hurry. That's it.
In fact, one could view quite plausibly the Hezbollah retaliation of August 25th as an Iranian retaliation for the reasons that you stated. I want to switch gears and focus on the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel. This week, on Monday morning, Nissim Vaturi, a Likud member of Israel's Knesset, claimed that it is, quote, a matter of days, close quote, before full-on war erupts between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. And Vaturi is a member of the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. He told the Kan public Israeli broadcaster that when the all-out war happens, Beirut's Dahia suburb, a major Hezbollah stronghold, will look like Gaza. Those were his words. Now, Vaturi has faced heavy criticism in the past for multiple comments calling to burn Gaza, and for asserting in January of this year that there are no innocent Palestinian civilians left in the Gaza Strip. Presumably, he thinks even babies are legitimate targets. Now, Elijah, we have heard repeated threats from Israel to deliver a devastating blow to Lebanon and Hezbollah, many predating the threat issued this week by Vaturi. But I personally have been to southern Lebanon 4 times since October 7th. I've stood near the border between Lebanon and occupied Palestine many times in the past 11 months. And although I could see on almost every occasion one or more Israeli military bases clearly in the distance, including Metula and Al-Manara, I have yet to see a single Israeli soldier anywhere near the Lebanese border. And if Israel is as fearful as it seems of exposing its soldiers to attacks from the Islamic resistance, what should we make of this threat from Vaturi? Is it seriously in the contemplation of Israel's leadership, in your opinion, that they must invade South Lebanon and face an even more formidable enemy than the one that they faced in 2006? Or is this likely to prove to be empty bluster?
Several months ago, I was kind of playing to count how many times the Israelis threatened to start the occupation of Lebanon. And I stopped at number 62. And then I've lost the account. And I said, there's no point in continuing to keep the records. So the Israelis cannot send troops to invade Lebanon. It's impossible. for many reasons. Militarily, secondly, the capability of Hezbollah is no longer the one in 2006. It has changed so much in the last years that is unimaginable for the Israelis to move one soldier and who can put a foot on Lebanese soil. And I think the problem you face in not seeing one Israeli is the same problem Hezbollah has in looking for at least a target that is visible, that they can hit, and they have to be content with all the spying equipments and some tanks that the Israelis make a mistake thinking that is impossible to hit. And that was because they thought at that time that the laser-guided missile of Hezbollah will reach 6 kilometers, unaware that the new version of the Kornet missile can reach 8 kilometers, while the Merkava tank can reach 4 kilometers, and this is why any advance of tanks inside Lebanon is impossible, because it will be immediately destroyed and no tank can cross the borders. However, in wars, nothing is impossible. The only possibility, and this is where the Israelis are struggling with today, is can they start using their air force, which is the best weapons they have to use against Hezbollah, or they don't do anything and keep the status quo. Netanyahu cannot accept the status quo because that will prevent him from continuing a war. Therefore, he is in need to start another kind of more violent war, because there is a war already existing on the borders with Lebanon. But the problem is that the military are divided. One side of the military consider that if we start attacking only military objectives of Hezbollah and we spare the civilians, because Israel respects Hezbollah and vice versa, military speaking, they know both sides will abide by the rules of engagement. If Israel starts to target military objectives, Hezbollah will not hit the civilians. And Hezbollah, thanks to the technology that Hezbollah has in precision missiles and drones, this is to the advantage of Israel not to launch blind rockets to hit any target, including civilians. So the more sophisticated Hezbollah has as weapons, the better it is for Israel to understand that Hezbollah's messages are direct, precise, and they tell the Israelis what they are going to do by sparing the civilians so Israel can follow suit. And in fact, in many occasions, the Israelis asked the United Nations when there were civilian casualties in Israel and vice versa in Lebanon, if the intention is to start hitting the civilians or not. And Hezbollah did the same. And the answer always was the same on both sides. No, we keep leaving the civilians on the side. So the first opinion from the Israelis is we can destroy more or less 10 to 13,000 targets of Hezbollah, and we're talking about officers, individual leaders, barracks, underground facilities, you name it. And in the Israeli Bank of Objectives, there can be this figure. And then the Israelis would say that we will cripple part of Hezbollah's capability for years to come, and perhaps this is the best way. And then we consider, and I'm talking in the mind of one part of the Israeli military, that Hezbollah can hit back and can destroy 2 objectives when we can destroy 10, because Israel has a bigger air capability and more precision bombs, and they have a tsunami of quantity of ammunition thanks to the US and Germany in the main place. Therefore, it is possible for the Israeli to say we can go and target military objectives, and then this is where we show strengths and deterrence. while another part of the Israelis are thinking of, what if we do not manage in our objectives and Hezbollah deter us and not vice versa? What's going to happen to us morally as the strongest army in the Middle East and one of the strongest in the world to be defeated by a non-state actor? As Hezbollah, when we receive the support of the world, we are part of US CENTCOM, Central Command of the Middle East, and we have the best intelligence provided by the whole West and Arab countries, and we have our own intelligence. We have our manufacturing, our capability, we have artificial intelligence, we have satellite, we have everything, and it's nothing in comparison to Hezbollah. But the Israelis don't have the soul to fight. And this is what Hezbollah has. And that is the difference. And it makes a difference because a non-state actor with an ideology is not afraid of dying. It doesn't mean he's looking for death. On the contrary, Hezbollah wants to live more than anybody else in Lebanon, but they want to live with dignity, or at least they want their family or the next generation to be able to stand against the Israeli aggressions and crimes. Mm-hmm. For that, because there is no secure answer and there is no clear cut between what would be the outcome of this war, without omitting the fact that Syria will be part of it, and Syria doesn't have the choice here because, as far as I know, Hezbollah has a missile and special forces capability in Syria equally to the one in Lebanon. This is why we don't see a ground invasion from Israel. Otherwise, Israel doesn't need thousands of justification to go into Lebanon. According to the latest statistic of the Israeli military spokesperson, Hezbollah launched 7,500 rockets, missiles, and drones against the Israelis. So they had 7,500 reasons to attack Hezbollah had they had the courage, the capability to secure a clear objective and an outcome that will be beneficial for Israel and the return of almost 100,000 of settlers to the north. Because these are absent, the answer is no war. Right. More than what it is today.
Let's look at another part of this theater of conflict, and that is the country of Jordan. On September 7th, a Jordanian truck driver shot dead 3 Israeli border guards at the Allenby Bridge, crossing from Jordan into the occupied West Bank. As far as I'm aware, Elijah, this is the deadliest attack by a Jordanian on Israeli targets since October 7th. And 2 days earlier, on September 5th, German Foreign Affairs Minister Annalena Baerbock visited Amman, and during her visit, she announced a paltry increase in Germany's humanitarian aid to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. The increase was 50 million euros, resulting in total German aid of about 360 million euros to Gaza since last year. And by the way, there's an interesting question, which we don't need to get into, about how any of this aid could possibly reach the victims of Israel's genocide, given Israel's obstruction of humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in Gaza. But I also want to point out that by comparison, this is truly a meager sum. Since 2022, Germany has allocated 34 billion, yes, that's billion euros, in military, economic, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, as compared to 360 million euros to the victims of a German-backed genocide in Gaza. Now, also, given Israel's, at a press conference, as I mentioned, which took place on September 5th, Jordan's Foreign Minister Ayman Al-Safadi shared some interesting sentiments with Germany's Foreign Minister. And I'd like to play for you in the audience a clip from that exchange, including Baerbock's response, and then I'm going to invite you to comment.
ألمانيا سباقة كانت دائما في الضغط من أجل تطبيق القانون الدولي، تطبيق القانون الدولي الإنساني، ومكانة ألمانيا والقيم الألمانية تفرض على ألمانيا اتخاذ خطوات واضحة فيما يتعلق بفرض عقوبات على الحكومة الإسرائيلية وعلى المسؤولين الإسرائيليين الذين يبثون ثقافة الكراهية ويحرضون على القتل ويبررون قتل الأبرياء ويدفعون المنطقة كلها باتجاه التصعيد. وبكل صراحة أقول إذا قطعت الكهرباء عن مخيمات اللجوء نتيجة عدم توفر الدعم الذي تحتاجه المنظمات الأممية فنحن لن نوفر الكهرباء لأننا لا نستطيع. مسؤوليتنا الأولى هي باتجاه شعبنا ونحن نواجه ظروف اقتصادية صعبة. كان لغزة آثار اقتصادية مدمرة على اقتصادنا وبالتالي نحن دولة إمكاناتنا محدودة وعلينا أن نتعامل وفق أولوياتنا.
Es braucht einen dauerhaften Frieden in der Region und es braucht vor allen Dingen eine Zwei-Staaten-Lösung. Die Realität ist aber leider, dass der Nahe und Mittlere Osten nur ein Wimpernschlag von der Katastrophe entfernt ist. Intensiven diplomatischen Bemühungen der internationalen Gemeinschaft ist es zu verdanken, dass die Funken, die überall sprühen, bislang keinen Flächenbrand entfacht haben. Deutschland stellt dafür weitere 50 Millionen Euro an humanitärer Hilfe für die Vereinten Nationen und internationale Nichtregierungsorganisationen zur Verfügung.
Now, Elijah, there's a lot you could say about this exchange and particularly the response of Baerbock, but I want to focus on a couple of issues which immediately came to mind. First of all, has Jordan imposed sanctions on Israel? Because my understanding is that it is not, although I could be mistaken about that. And if not, why is Jordan calling on Germany to impose sanctions when it is not itself willing to do so?
Well, first of all, there is something we used to believe in the West, that we have values. And we used to believe that we are a nation where international law is important, where we pay our taxes because we believe to pass on the power to the government so the government can look after its citizens and can apply laws on everybody equally, and that we have some morale, even if we are the most brutal nation ever when we went to occupy other countries and other continents across the centuries, and nobody killed as much as we have, including the Americans, in the history of humankind. We're talking about the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Portuguese Empire, the American Empire, all these, the Roman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian, and you name it. Not going to start with that. But we have took off this dress and said, okay, well, let's start with abiding by international laws, stand on high moral ground, and now we have learned from the past, and then we need to look ahead, which is fine. If this is our decision, then let's be it. And then we have the war in Ukraine, and then we have Donald Trump giving a gift to Israel that's saying, oh, by the way, the Golan Heights is Syrian, but you can have it. And then you want Jerusalem, you can have it. And then Israel is small, wait for me until it becomes bigger. And Antony Blinken is asked, what about the Golan Heights? You're talking about human rights, and no country has the right to invade another or to take part of another country. And he was referring to Lugansk and Donetsk, Zaporozhye and Kherson that Russia has occupied, not fully, but is occupying. And he said, oh, no, that is okay because it's important for the Israeli national security. Now, this double standards and hypocrisy went on to a certain limit when the flagrant assassination attempt targets the crimes against humanity, war crimes, and intent of genocide, when Israeli leaders, starting from Prime Minister, who is saying these are Amalek and we need to destroy them. You have Galland, the defense minister, who's without any shame, we're going to cut water, electricity, food supply, medical supply, everything on a population, and then call them animals. This is exactly what the German Nazi called the Jews during the Second World War. We see history repeating itself, but completely differently. And this is what the Jordanian minister is talking to the German foreign minister when he said international laws and values. He is telling the West, well, we have a monarchy, we have a king, we don't have a full democracy, and we don't pretend to have one. But you do. You have a democracy, you call upon a certain value, and you do not abide by these values. So don't come and lecture us. We are limited. This is what we have. This is what we can do. Jordan receives water, electricity, and gas from Israel. And Jordan is not a strong country, even if it has a strong and motivated ideological population ready to go and fight in Palestine in support of the Palestinians. Not because they originate from Palestine, no. It's exactly the same reason why Yemen is engaged. Yemen is engaged and Hezbollah is engaged. Both sides are engaged because of the humanitarian approach toward the Palestinian people, because they are supporting their human fellow, where there is no nationality here. It makes me upset when I hear the Palestinians saying, well, only Palestinians are allowed to speak about what's happening in Palestine. No, this is not their cause. It's a cause of every single human being who believes in another human being. If we believe in justice and we want to stand against injustice and we want justice for all, Palestine or any other country is just a name of a nation. We all stand by justice. And what Al-Safadi is reminding Baerbock is to say, stick to your international values and to the international laws. At least don't allow people who are under the justice system by the International Court of Justice, the highest in the world, that is accusing Israel of intent of genocide and still investigating it, and no doubt of its crime against humanity and war crimes, don't stand by these people, particularly when Germany provides 30% of Israel's need of weapons. And to go and provide $55.5 million is really a mockery for Germany, because Germany has again confirmed that it is not only in 1940s was on the wrong side of history, but today is again on the wrong side of history.
I want to close with one observation, Elijah, and I invite you to comment. You know, we're often told that the German support for Israel stems from its sense of guilt, national guilt over the Holocaust. And of course, the German people have a great deal to be guilty about, no doubt about it. But at the elite level of German politics, I've never believed this for 1 second. I don't actually believe that the reason why the German government supports Israel, even now in a time of a flagrant genocide, is because of historical culpability towards the Jewish people. After all, it is an obscenity to suggest that the way a genocidal regime discharges its duty to the victims of its genocide is by perpetrating a genocide on an innocent people who had nothing to do with its own crimes. It's an obscenity. It flies in the face of the most basic sense of human decency. So myself, I've never bought this line that the German government gives us, that it has to support Israel because of the monstrosities Germans committed during the Second World War, along with many other Europeans, I might add. I think this ultimately comes down to a cold, hard sort of political power analysis of the necessity of the West maintaining control over the resources, the vast resources and the strategic trade routes of West Asia. And also it has a lot to do with just basic slavish servitude to the masters of Europe and Washington. What is your take on all of this? Do you buy this refrain we've been hearing for decades that Germany must support Israel no matter what because of the monstrosities it committed in the Second World War?
I certainly don't. I don't take Baerbock as an example because she's an amateur. She came to Brussels at the beginning of the war between Ukraine and Russia, and she said, let us face it, we are at war with Russia. So she declared war on Russia without understanding the meaning of this sentence when a European country comes out and says, I declare war on Russia. That is an amateurish behavior. And she wants Russia to change its position 360 degrees without understanding that 360 degrees, meaning turning exactly to the same point of departure. This is kind of diplomacy Germany is represented today. Nevertheless, to go to your point, which I fully agree with, in the 13th century, the Jews were mistreated by Europe. In this continent where we are at, we have started here. Our ancestors started to accuse the Jews of atrocity. Any plea, any disease, anything that happened bad to the continent, the Jews were to be blamed for that. If you look at a film called The Merchant of Venice, you understand how the Jews were in ghetto, even in Italy, in Venice, where they were locked at a certain time. Because, again, the hypocrisy of the West is endless. We consider that, according to Christianity, we cannot ask for interest from people we are giving a loan, but the Jews can, because it's part of their culture. Therefore, we would go to the Jew to borrow money and pay the interest because they would offer the service when we could not offer that because of the Christian-dominated era when Christianity was overpowering all the European regime. And in 1917, before the war, the Second World War started, the Balfour Agreement, the Accord, the signature of Lord Balfour on a document declaring that he wants the Zionists to go to Palestine. And he asked Lord Rothschild to inform the Zionist movement that they can move to Palestine, came in 1917. It has nothing to do with the Second World War and the Holocaust. So we have invited, because of political reason, divide and conquer, because the British Empire wanted someone there in the middle of rich country for fear of the Arabs getting together. We were terrified by the Muslim with one religion that they can have the power of oil and unity. Therefore, there was a need for someone to divide them. And this is where the Zionists, not the Jews, because the Jews were in Palestine with the Christian and Muslims who were living all together in perfect harmony. When the first Haganah group landed in Palestine, there were 27,000 Jews there. So the problem today is not with the Jews. The problem today is with Zionism, with the Nathist movement that pretends it is the chosen people of a God that this movement doesn't believe in. So this is the problem that started not by the Holocaust and not by the German guilt of the guilt generation today in Germany that feels it needs to compensate. This is not compensating. If you want to compensate, you don't go and encourage another atrocity, another crime, because the Israelis told us, according to their films on social media, that the way they were dealing with the Palestinians in Gaza is much worse than what the Germans had done to a group of Jews that were caught in the middle of Western and Eastern Europe.
Well, Elijah, it's been a great pleasure speaking with you today, and I thank you for taking the time, and I hope we can continue this conversation in the future. I'm sure there'll be many fascinating and compelling developments to speak about in the days ahead.
Well, it was great to have you and to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.